The moment Ramona Blake stepped into room 304, the air shifted, thickened, like walking through smoke that only she could see. Hospitals were supposed to be sterile, predictable. But nothing about this room felt ordinary. The man in the bed was unconscious, tubes winding from his arms and face, machines clicking and blinking like quiet sentinels. And yet, Ramona stood frozen, her clipboard halfway to her chest, her eyes locked on a face she never thought she'd see again. Her pulse quickened. The name on the chart had meant nothing. Alaric Shaw, male, mid-40s, no emergency contacts. But now that she was here, standing over him, the reality hit like a truck. His face, though worn by time and bruised by something unknown, was unmistakable. Thinner now, more hollow. But the angular jawline, the scar near his temple, the set of his mouth even in sleep, it was him. The man who had sat in a courtroom 2 decades ago and destroyed her world without a flicker of emotion. Ramona took a step back, her breath shallow. The past came rushing up like bile in her throat. Her father in chains, her mother's face pale with shock, the whispers that never stopped in their small Oregon town. And Alaric Shaw, a prosecutor with ice in his veins and fire in his words, had lit the match that burned her family to the ground. She had spent years trying to erase his face from her memory. And now, fate had delivered it back into her hands. She should have walked out. Let someone else take the case. But her feet refused to move. She was a nurse now, not a child. And yet, standing here, she felt like that girl again. Helpless, voiceless, drowning in a system she couldn't fight. Only this time, she had the power. He was the one unconscious. He was the one who couldn't run. Ramona inched closer, drawn by something she didn't understand. Hatred? Curiosity? A desperate need for closure? She reached down, adjusting the 4-line with a trembling hand. And that's when she saw it, scrawled in black ink beneath the name on his hospital bracelet, "Do not notify family." Her chest tightened. Why would a man like Alaric Shaw want to disappear? What had he done, or what had been done to him? She stared at his still face for 1 more second. Then she turned toward the door, but her body lingered. Whatever had brought him here, it wasn't finished. And for reasons she didn't yet understand, neither was she. If this story got you hooked, hit the like button and subscribe now so you don't miss the next chapters. Alaric Shaw's mystery is just beginning, and what Ramona's about to uncover could change everything. Turn on the bell and stay with us until the end of this revelation. Ramona barely slept that night. Even after her shift ended, the image of Alaric Shaw's unconscious body followed her home like a shadow that wouldn't loosen its grip. She stood in her tiny kitchen, staring blankly at the steam rising from her tea. Every part of her wanted to believe it was coincidence, a cruel trick of fate. But deep down, in the place she tried to keep sealed, something had shifted. And the tremor was only just beginning. She pulled out the worn box from the top of her closet, the one she hadn't touched in years. Inside were pieces of a shattered past, newspaper clippings, her father's sentencing documents, a faded photograph of her parents at their wedding. And beneath it all, the photo that still made her stomach twist, Alaric Shaw, younger, sharper, wearing that same cold stare in court. She remembered how confident he had looked, how final his words had sounded. To him, her family was just another file, another win. Ramona sat on the edge of her bed, fingers trembling over the edges of the paper. Why now? Why him? Why here? She had spent her whole adult life trying to outrun that chapter, changing towns, changing careers, even changing her last name for a time. But pain had a strange way of finding you again, especially when it never really left. Back at the hospital the next evening, she hesitated outside room 304. A part of her hoped he would be gone, that maybe he'd been transferred, or maybe worse. But when she opened the door, he was still there, still motionless, still haunting her in ways she couldn't explain. Only now, she noticed something new. his fingers twitching slightly, a sign of restlessness. Her stomach tightened. What if he woke up? And what if he remembered her? She moved cautiously to his bedside, forcing herself into the role she knew so well. Nurse Blake, composed, professional, detached. But inside, every second near him felt like holding her breath underwater. She checked his vitals, adjusted his oxygen, but her eyes kept returning to his face. He looked different now. Older, worn, maybe even broken. It was terrifying how human he seemed lying there, a far cry from the untouchable prosecutor who once stood above her family like a judge. As she turned to leave, his lips moved, barely audible, a murmur lost in the hum of the machines. She froze. Her heart stopped. She leaned in, and this time she heard it clearly. He whispered, "Ramona." Ramona's entire body went cold. She staggered back a step, eyes wide, staring at the man in the bed like he'd just risen from the dead. The machines still beeped steadily, and his eyelids remained closed, but the word had been unmistakable. Not mumbled gibberish. Not a random breath. Her name. Spoken as if it had lived on his tongue for years. As if it belonged there. She gripped the railing of the hospital bed, forcing herself to breathe. It didn't make sense. He couldn't know who she was. When he'd ruined her life, she was just a girl, a name in a file, a silent figure in the courtroom's back row. He had never once looked at her, never acknowledged her. How could he possibly remember her now, all these years later, unconscious and half-broken? The thought made her skin crawl. Unless he had known. Back then. All along. Maybe her family hadn't just been another case. Maybe it had been personal. The idea twisted in her mind like barbed wire. She wanted to believe it was coincidence, a random fragment of a dream. But that single whispered name shattered that hope. And now, nothing about this man, or this moment, felt safe. Later, at the nurse's station, she found herself watching his chart more closely than she had any other patient's. Every stat, every lab result, every change in heart rate became something more than data. They were signs, clues, pieces of a puzzle she never wanted to solve, yet couldn't look away from. Jane noticed. "You okay, Ramona?" she asked, setting down a tray. Ramona smiled thinly, but her hands were still trembling beneath the desk. That night, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Not literally, but emotionally, like a memory with eyes. She walked to her car with her keys tight in her fist, checking the dark corners of the parking lot twice before unlocking the door. Inside, she sat behind the wheel for nearly 10 minutes before turning the ignition. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked like a stranger, tired, afraid, unraveling. Back at her apartment, the silence was unbearable. She pulled the photo of Alaric out again, this time placing it side by side with a fresh picture, the one she took with her phone earlier that night when she lingered longer than she should have by his bed. Same man. Same scars. Same legacy of destruction. But something else now lived in his expression, even in unconsciousness. Not power. Not arrogance. Regret. By the third day, Ramona had memorized every inch of room 304. She could walk the space with her eyes closed, from the edge of the four-stand to the corner where the chair sat untouched, its cushion still holding the shape of yesterday's silence. But nothing about that room felt ordinary anymore. Alaric hadn't spoken again since that night. But the damage was done. Her name, whispered from his lips, echoed in her every thought. She found herself staring at the hospital's internal system longer than necessary. There had to be something, anything, that explained why he ended up here, alone, no one to call, no past to chase him. But his records were oddly thin. Admitted with blunt force trauma to the head, found unconscious behind a gas station in Santa Clara. Wallet missing. No fingerprints on file. The man who once stood as a pillar of justice was now a blank page. And that, more than anything, terrified her. Ramona had seen runaways. She'd treated addicts, victims of violence, even men who lied about their names. But this? A man like Alaric Shaw didn't just vanish. Not without reason. And not without enemies. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed his name into a private search tab off the hospital network and waited. News articles, court records, one dated piece about a prosecutor turned high-end defense attorney. Then nothing for nearly 8 years. Like he'd dropped off the face of the earth. That absence screamed louder than any headline. Back in his room, she sat beside him for the first time without touching the chart. Just watched. His chest rose and fell in slow rhythm, his face pale beneath the overhead light. She hated how familiar he was becoming. How easily the lines in his face had started to mean something. She didn't want to feel pity or curiosity, but something was pulling her in, and it wasn't just unresolved anger. It was that note on his bracelet. Do not notify family. No emergency contact. No friends. Just silence. Then she noticed the folder tucked beneath the end of his bed, a thin manila file that hadn't been there before. Her pulse jumped. She pulled it out with shaking hands. Most of it was routine. Vitals, imaging, medication logs. But in the last page, scrawled in pen by someone on intake, was a single line she couldn't look away from. Subject found with old photo in jacket, woman and child unknown. And Ramona, for the first time in years, felt fear crawl beneath her skin. Ramona stared at the note again, her eyes locked on the final line. Subject found with old photo in jacket, woman and child unknown. Her throat tightened. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. And yet, the question lodged itself in her chest like a splinter. What if the woman was her mother? She ran her fingers over the folder, heart thudding loud in her ears. The photo hadn't been logged with the rest of the patient's belongings, at least not officially. Which meant someone had seen it. Someone had chosen not to include it in the report. Was it lost? Hidden? Or protected? She didn't want to alert the staff just yet. Not until she saw it with her own eyes. She had to be sure. That night, long after most of the floor had gone quiet, Ramona slipped into the staff locker room and accessed the personal items safe. Alaric's name was on one of the brown security envelopes. She paused, her hands hovering, a war raging inside her between duty and obsession. Then she opened it. Inside were a set of keys, a crumpled receipt, and a photograph. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. It was old, worn at the edges, as if it had been carried for years. A woman stood beside a man unmistakably younger, but undeniably Alaric Shaw. And in her arms was a little girl with pale hair and wide, frightened eyes. Ramona gasped. Her knees nearly buckled. The child was her. That picture had only ever existed in one place, a photo album that disappeared the night her father was arrested. She hadn't seen it in over 20 years. Her mind reeled. Why would he have this? Had he taken it? Kept it? Stolen it? Was that photo a trophy, or something else entirely? Her thoughts spiraled, questions she didn't have answers for clawing at her insides. She shoved the photo back in the envelope and closed the locker, her breath shallow, her hands icy cold. Back in room 304, she stood over him again. But this time, something inside her had changed. The man in the bed wasn't just her enemy anymore. He was a riddle, a deeply personal one. And he was the only person alive who might know the truth about that photo, about what really happened to her family all those years ago. And just then, as if summoned by the storm inside her, Alaric's eyes fluttered. They opened, and locked directly onto hers. Did Alaric keep the photo out of love, or guilt? Ramona saw a piece of her lost past in it. Who was the woman beside him? And why did the photo vanish for 20 years? Drop your theory in the comments. This story is just getting started. The silence in room 304 was deafening. Ramona stood frozen, her fingers still clutching the bed rail, her heart racing in her chest. Alaric's eyes, heavy, bloodshot, confused, locked onto hers with an intensity that turned her insides to ice. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Neither spoke. Just stared. As if the past had wrapped itself around the present and neither of them could breathe through it. He blinked slowly, his lips parting like he was trying to speak, but no words came. His hand twitched near the sheets. Ramona stepped back, instinctively. She didn't know what scared her more, that he recognized her, or that he didn't. His gaze softened for a moment, like he was trying to place her. Or maybe trying not to. There was something unreadable in his expression. Not surprise, not panic. Almost guilt. "Water," he rasped, barely audible. Ramona moved on autopilot, pouring a small cup and helping him sip it slowly. She told herself it was protocol, just doing her job. But her hands trembled. Her mind screamed. Every inch of her body wanted to yell, to demand answers, to shake him until the photo fell out of his memory. But instead, she stayed quiet. He coughed gently and leaned back, breathing harder now. "Where am I?" he asked, voice hoarse. She gave him the basics. "Hospital. ICU. Found unconscious. No ID. No one to contact." His eyes flickered as the pieces settled. Then he looked at her again. Longer this time. "You're—" he started, then hesitated. The silence between them filled with 1,000 unspoken truths. He didn't finish the sentence. But she saw it. In his eyes. He knew. Ramona clenched her jaw. "I'm Nurse Blake," she said flatly, ignoring the tremor in her voice. "You're stable, for now. You were out for 3 days." She turned to leave, fast, before her emotions cracked open in front of him. But his voice stopped her. "I didn't know. It was you." He said it like a confession. Soft. Broken. She didn't turn around. Didn't breathe. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. Because if he truly did know who she was, and he carried that photo anyway, then whatever story was buried between them was far from finished. And now that he was awake, she was finally going to dig it up. Ramona didn't sleep after that shift. She drove home with the windows down, cold air hitting her face like punishment. The image of Alaric's eyes, soft, regretful, aware, burned into her mind. He remembered. He'd said it himself. And yet, he hadn't begged for forgiveness. He hadn't even tried to explain. Just that quiet sentence. "I didn't know it was you." What did that even mean? By morning, her exhaustion gave way to something sharper, determination. She returned to the hospital earlier than scheduled, heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. Room 304 was quiet, but Alaric was awake now, sitting upright with the head of the bed slightly raised. He turned when she entered. His face looked older in the daylight. And guilty. That mattered. "You kept the photo," she said without preamble. No pleasantries. No mask. Just the words she hadn't stopped rehearsing since last night. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look surprised. He nodded slowly, then reached to the nightstand drawer and pulled it out, the faded photo of her mother, and him. "I never meant for you to see that," he said quietly. "Not like this." "Then how?" Her voice was brittle. "How exactly did you plan for me to find out you kept a picture of the family you destroyed?" Alaric exhaled, the kind of breath that carried weight. "Because that's not what I did, Ramona. At least, not the way you think." His voice was ragged, and his hands fumbled in his lap. "The case they gave me back then, it was political. High profile. Your father was made an example. They needed someone to take the fall. I was young, ambitious, and I didn't ask the questions I should have. Ramona's throat tightened. You knew he was innocent? I knew the evidence didn't line up, he said, meeting her eyes now, the shame clear. But they gave me a story to tell, and I told it. I believed what they wanted me to believe. Until it was too late. He paused. I kept the photo because I needed to remember what I did, what I didn't stop, who I failed. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had been left unsaid for decades. Ramona didn't speak. Not yet. Her hands trembled, but not from rage this time, from the realization that her enemy might have been a coward, but not the monster she painted for 20 years. And just when the room couldn't feel heavier, Alaric whispered, "There's something else. About your mother. Something I never put in the report." Ramona didn't blink, didn't breathe. She stood at the edge of the hospital bed, arms crossed tight against her chest, bracing for a blow she couldn't yet see. Alaric's voice was low, uneven, the kind that only came from someone carrying a truth for far too long. "There was a letter," he said, "written by your mother. I found it the day after your father's sentencing. But by then, it was already sealed, filed, done." Ramona's eyes narrowed. What kind of letter? He hesitated. A confession, but not the kind anyone expected. His fingers tightened on the blanket. Your mother. She knew the evidence had been altered. She knew your father wasn't guilty of the fraud charges. But she didn't come forward. And in the letter, she said why. He met Ramona's eyes, and she saw something there that terrified her more than anger, sorrow. She thought protecting you meant staying silent. She believed the scandal would destroy you worse than a prison sentence would destroy him. Ramona felt like the floor shifted beneath her. "No," she said, barely a whisper. "My mother. She barely spoke after the trial. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. Her voice broke. She wouldn't lie." "She didn't," Alaric said softly. "She just let the truth rot in the dark." He leaned back against the pillows, eyes distant. "I was going to submit it, even after sentencing. I could have reopened the case. But I didn't. I was afraid of what it would do to my career. I told myself it was too late. I buried it. Literally. In a box in my father's storage unit in Oregon." Ramona's hands were shaking now. Rage and disbelief pulsed through her in equal waves. "You let my father rot in a cell. You let my mother waste away with guilt. You watched my whole life collapse, and you buried the only thing that could have stopped it." Alaric didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just closed his eyes like someone too tired to fight anymore. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I never did. But when I got sick, when I knew something was wrong, I drove to the only place I thought I deserved to fall. Here." Tears blurred Ramona's vision, but she didn't wipe them. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, because now the pain that had lived inside her for so long was twisting into something else. A need to know the whole truth, no matter what it cost. 2 days later, Ramona stood in front of a rusted storage unit just outside of Eugene, Oregon, a place that smelled of old metal, damp concrete, and forgotten things. The key Alaric had given her trembled in her hand. He hadn't begged. He hadn't asked for mercy. He just whispered the address and told her, "If you want the truth, it's there." She could have said no. She could have walked away. But something inside her needed to see it with her own eyes. Closure wasn't something you waited for. It was something you had to go take. The lock snapped open with a heavy clunk. Inside, dust hung in the air like ghosts. Rows of boxes lined the walls, most of them marked with faded writing. Court cases, evidence logs, old files long forgotten. She searched for nearly an hour before she found it, a small, dented metal box with her mother's name written in shaky cursive on masking tape. Ramona stared at it for a long time before touching it, as if opening it might change the shape of everything she believed. Inside, she found yellowed papers, folded letters, and a photograph she had never seen before. Her parents, holding hands in front of their first house. Her mother looked so alive, so full of light. Ramona's chest tightened. Underneath it all was a sealed envelope, brittle from time. Her name was on it. Not her mother's handwriting, but Alaric's. For Ramona. When you're ready. Her fingers shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was a typed copy of the letter her mother had written, the one Alaric had confessed to hiding. And as she read it, sentence by sentence, her world fractured. Her mother had known about the manipulation. She had tried to come forward. But threats had come in the night, not against herself, but against Ramona. An anonymous voice had warned, "Let the case go, or your daughter suffers next." The letter ended with her mother's words, etched in sorrow. "I chose silence, because I thought I was saving you. I just hope one day you'll forgive me." Ramona sank to the cold cement floor, the paper clutched to her chest. Everything she thought she understood, about her mother's weakness, about her father's shame, about Alaric's role in their fall, had shifted. No one had been innocent. But no one had been purely guilty, either. For the first time in 20 years, she saw her past not as a wound, but as a puzzle she had finally started to solve. And the final piece was waiting for her back in room 304. When Ramona stepped into room 304 for the last time, Alaric was awake, sitting upright, pale but alert. The machines no longer beeped with urgency. The oxygen had been removed. And in his eyes, there was no confusion now. Only the weight of someone waiting for judgment. She walked in slowly, the metal box tucked under her arm like a verdict. He didn't speak. He watched her, quietly, as she set the box down on the table beside his bed. "I went," she said. Her voice was even, calm. But there was something in it that hadn't been there before. Resolve. "I read the letter. I saw the photo. I know everything now." Alaric nodded slowly. There was no defense in him. No excuses. Just silence. "I hated you," Ramona whispered. "For years. I built my life around that hate. Every time I doubted myself, every time I failed, I blamed you. And you deserved it. Some of it. But I didn't know what my mother carried. Or what she chose to hide." She looked at him then, really looked. And for the first time, he didn't seem like a villain. He looked like a man who had lived too long with the truth gnawing at his soul. "I kept the photo because it was all I had left of that moment," Alaric said quietly. "A second before everything broke. I wasn't innocent. I was selfish. But I never stopped wondering what happened to you." He paused. "And I never stopped regretting that I didn't stop it when I had the chance." Ramona stood still for a long time. Then, without a word, she pulled the photo from her coat pocket and placed it in his hand. "You don't need to wonder anymore," she said. "I survived. I became something. Not because of you. In spite of you." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "That doesn't mean I forgive you. But it means I won't carry this anymore." Alaric's hand closed around the photo. He didn't call after her. He didn't ask for more. He simply lowered his eyes, as if the act of holding that memory again was enough. And Ramona stepped into the hallway, the air somehow lighter around her. Not because justice had been served, but because truth had finally spoken. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like someone who had taken her story back. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Here, you'll find powerful, emotional stories that stay with you. The next one might touch you even deeper.